Hello, everyone. So today we have another special podcast episode here. Aren't they all special, though, with you joining as my audience? So today's subject is going to be psychology trends that need to start in the mental health field. There are a few trends that I think we're going to have to see for the psychotherapy field, or it's going to sink and not swim. So we need to really work on the way that we prioritize knowledge in the field and really get rid of pseudoscience. And so just addressing things with this kind of organized common sense and very no scientific approach, sort of questioning and there and a lot of the fluff, a lot of the self-care gospel, I'm going to call it. So anything that just says basically, well, give yourself a pat on the back and believe that everything's going to get better. That's not a technology of improvement at all. That's not something that's going to yield long-term useful results. But what is, and what is beyond a cup of coffee with friends, is something like EMDR trauma reprocessing. So I've said before that with trauma is a nervous system disorder, right? And the good news is it's acquired. Okay. So that means that it can be unacquired. It can be trained out through the systematic desensitization of trauma triggers. Yay. That happens. Phobias can be treated the same way. So I think there's a bit of an anti-scientific bias that we are going to have to overcome as psychotherapists. So that's one massive shift that we need, if you're keeping score on the scorecard, is we need science, evidence-based approach. So things like neurofeedback as well, right? That would go under this heading. So we need to take into account medical interventions. So therapists can get certified to do neurofeedback brainwave training. I don't know if people realize that, but we need to embrace science. And that doesn't mean that we don't, it's actually far from it. So I value people's faith in therapy. And what I mean is we as therapists need a scientific approach and methodology to comprehend what we're doing and how to implement it. So another change that I think we need to embrace, that kind of goes along with this, but I would say is a different thing altogether here for heading purposes, would be really getting up to speed on the evolutionary psychology revolution. So we have enough books now and literature that really bears out quite a bit of the predictions of evolutionary psychology. So, and really there's two big things that gets to, so that field covers. So you've got survival and mating. So things that increase either of those will tend to persist. So we have evolutionary psychology explanations for personality disorders like narcissistic personality disorder. It persists because people with NPD are very good often at self-promotion, confidence, the appearance of competency and skills and goods, right, to provide a mate. That tends to increase your mating potential and outcome. So evolutionary psychology is a really helpful perspective that many psychologists have actually taken and run with, but I don't think we therapists have done as good a job at that. And what's interesting is you can actually take a Christian evolutionary psychology approach and say, well, unfettered natural sin nature is what we do if we don't overcome the programming that we have that's just animalistic, right? So you can actually have a really interesting spin on evolutionary psychology where it fits a religious worldview. And that's kind of how I take it. So really there's no excuse not to understand the emerging science of evolutionary psychology, right? I mean, it explains so much. It explains that men want to indiscriminately mate because that's their evolutionary imperative for genetic spreading. It explains that women survive through guarding themselves from men who are bad actors and who will abandon them, right? So women are incentivized to screen more than men. I mean, all of the conjecture makes so much sense that we would be remiss as therapists to not understand it. I'm a Stanley boy. So may cut that out in the podcast, but we're just riffing here. So I'm wondering if my email sent out to as many people because I had a lot of people last time. So what I'm thinking here is we talk about how this kind of dovetails with something else. So men, okay, a significant gender disparity exists in therapeutic help-seeking behaviors, with men seeking therapy half as often as women. Okay, so that's despite concerning mental health statistics. Men experience depression at high rates, with approximately a third of them experiencing depressive episodes at least once in their life, and they're 3.5 times more likely to unalive by suicide, twice as likely to experience fatal overdoses compared to women. That's a big deal, right? So traditional explanations attribute men's reluctance to seek help to socialization pressures and the desire to avoid appearing vulnerable. But this explanation is insufficient, right? Therapy is confidential and private. So we need to take that into account. So deeper analysis reveals that many men have internalized self-reliance as a core value and experience negative consequences when they've shown vulnerability in social contexts. Boom. That's a big mic drop moment. So basically, we need to, as therapists, market better to men. Okay? We really need to. We need to help people understand that men, particularly, that therapy is not sitting around and crying and whining. It really isn't. Not that cathartically expressing your sadness is bad at all. It's not. But I want to be very clear here that there's been a disservice done to men where, and that's through us as therapists not stepping up and doing our jobs to a huge extent. Okay? So the disservice is that men have been left to think that therapy is mostly an emoting process when in fact it isn't. Therapy, yes. Yeah, that's right. So men do tend to go to their regular physicians less as well. That's accurate. And I mean, part of that is male reluctance to, check in on physical health stuff. It's just not seen as big a priority for whatever reason. I mean, it is an interesting one to think about because we have some clear cut examples of why men aren't as likely to go to therapy because they don't value emotion as this concept. Emotional wellness, it's not a solid tangible thing, right? Like emotional wellness for men is what they need to perform. And listen, here's the deal. I want to get really, we could just derail on this for a minute. I want to disabuse this idea that helping men means that we give in to any toxicity, because here's the thing: men can be self-sacrificing in a selfish way. Now, how can that happen? That's a spicy comment. So I would say it this way. So if you tell a guy repeatedly he needs to get some help and relax and have fun in order to be more emotionally available and less snippy, and he says, no, I'm just going to keep working and I'm not going to do that because we need the money, which, yes, money's very important, especially if you're in financial straits and it's dire. But men can just view acquiring things and providing as their contribution, even when they've been told that they need more and don't survive by bread alone. So I think at that point, if a man isn't listening, he's just shooting himself in the foot. And the male approach that you provide and you go through pain emotionally or physically to make a paycheck and give it, if men are being told that's not all that matters now, but they won't listen to that, they're making a big mistake. And I think so that's what I'm saying is men need to take time to cultivate their hobbies and what they enjoy. And here's the thing also, again, from an evolutionary psychology perspective, a man who shows that he can survive and thrive and has a social life and connections beyond the dating world signals to women, if he's single, right, and wants to date, that he has a life. And that's very attractive to women. It shows that you have the ability to socially engage, to acquire positive feedback relationships, goods, whatever, through being pro-social. And being in pro-social engagement is something that primates, including human beings, thrive on. It's not just taking things. Masculinity historically has not been just taking what you consider yours and being domineering. Far from it. It's been wheeling and dealing. And sure, there's some deals where some person gets left in the dust and the other one gets the better end of it. Sure. But typically, being a confident man and being able to be a deal broker, right, is considered attractive as well. And I think that element of masculinity, of being the confident deal maker, needs to make a huge comeback because I think you see it in some media. You see it with like Tony Stark potentially when he took on a big role in the Endgame series. He was self-sacrificial. He stepped up from being the playboy. I think we need more versions of that where the hero doesn't pass away at the end. But if you look at a lot of the media now with masculinity, it's portrayed very poorly. And then on top of being portrayed poorly, the alternatives seem to be, well, basically be feminine. Well, here's the problem. Women don't want that. I was just listening to Diary of a CEO podcast, women want a man who earns more than them, right? And they want a man who has something that they don't offer. And so we know for a fact that what women are wanting in dating is different than just a man who is emotionally intelligent. That's necessary, but not sufficient. So, I mean, I'm going on this, so I'll probably try to wheel it back in because this isn't, I mean, if you're a heterosexual woman and you either are married to a man or you want to be with a man, or if you're a mother and you have a son, all of this is probably very relevant. So, men, yes, self reliance is a core value. That's okay. Men can rely on themselves for most things. However, again, let's go back to ancient history, and no one man had a job where they did everything. They had to be in the world of professions and trades, and you had to rely on some people to a certain extent, unless you had a farm and everything was under your control, right? Agrarian life was the only way you could potentially be completely self reliant. And that was a blip in human history. Hunting and gathering required you definitely to evolve a sense of tribal teamwork, or you would not be able to take down larger animals like a mammoth or something that could just one shot a human being in one squash of the foot. Okay, so men experience barriers to help seeking beyond simple concerns about the appearance of vulnerability. So, therapeutic community really needs to acknowledge these concerns instead of dismissing them as toxic masculinity. Okay, we don't need to use that term. And by the way, I have more female clients than male clients, so I'm not anti-female at all. Engagement of men in therapy requires reconceptualizing our therapeutic approaches instead of just simply encouraging men to conform to existing models. So, evidence suggests that men may respond well to certain structured therapeutic environments, demonstrated by the significant male presence in what I talk about a lot, 12-step communities, AA, right? Men like mentorship environments, okay? So, men like hierarchy. Hierarchy is not a bad word. Let me explain. A positive hierarchy, there is a thing, I'll talk about it, is a mentor, a mentee, and then maybe even someone below that. So, like, think about the Jedi, right? Master, Knight, Padawan. I can't believe I'm bringing up Star Wars in my second stream here, 2 weeks in a row. I mean, this is not my second stream. This is not my first or second rodeo. But I've seen, just fun fact. I know I'm riffing here. I may edit this out. I might not, depending on if I feel like a conversational podcast is the way to go. Let me know in the chat what you think about that. Do you prefer conversational listening? Do you like it when it's more like a lecture with no, I mean, even a lecture? A lot of professors do personal stories. Or do you like something that's just an info dump? Let me know in the comments and make it where I can understand what you're referring to, because the comments come through like 2 minutes after I say something. So I'm just like, what was that? Oh, yeah. So feel free to share this too if you want. Here's what I would say. So, hierarchy is necessary in the military. You don't want someone who's never fired a howitzer, grenade launcher, or missile launcher to be just as able to use that and given that as someone who's been doing that and knows how to track a target, right? Like, we need to be serious. Men like hierarchy, like 12-step communities. Men like to know where they fit and they like to know that they can move up and down. Women like men who are higher in hierarchy. Men evolved to see hierarchies, whereas women, so women mate select quite a bit, and female choice is what shaped men to be what they are now to a huge extent. And I don't want to sound bombastic, but they select each other, right? So it's this recursive, this loop. Okay, it's a feedback loop. So men want to impress, they want a hierarchy, they want to know how to get higher in it, not to dominate cruelly unless they're psychopathic, but to show excellence. And women like displays of excellence. So yes, competency is another word for it. Brilliant. Competency is not a bad word. Excellence used to be. Now it's coming back more into vogue. I think we're entering almost like a neo romantic period. And I think we're so much the better for it. I grew up being told, do what you want and do it excellently career wise. So when I became a therapist, I learned to use the best approaches I had available to me, such as EMDR therapy. I learned to help clients in ways that really make them, give them positive results in an evidence-based way that I can point to instead of, just have you tried thinking differently? Like, it just doesn't, that wasn't how I was raised in my life. And so that gets another thing for men. Okay. And I promise we're going to get to other topics here. We talked about embracing science. We talked about evolutionary psychology. Now we're talking about men. So that's three big things here that need to change in the therapy world for us to not lose an entire segment of the population. So ongoing with that, Therapeutic approaches that acknowledge men's experiences of vulnerability as threatening, potentially, based on past social consequences, may create more effective entry points to get male clients. Okay? So the issue may not be men's resistance to self help, but specific therapeutic contexts and approaches that don't align with their experience as men. Big mic drop. Alternative formats that emphasize skill building, boom, problem solving, tangible outcomes might better engage men, at least initially, in the therapeutic rapport building process, okay? Creating safety for those deeper emotional explorations that we often do. So, EMDR therapy, I know I keep bringing it up, but eye movement desensitization reprocessing is a great model because you have the male client or any client, but we're talking about men here. Think of the traumatic memory, move through it, give us a 1 to 2 sentence summary, move through it, up and down, into the trauma, out of the trauma, into the trauma. So, and you have them focus on the work of desensitizing it through exposure, through that mechanism of psychology versus, well, talk about it the whole time until you feel better. No, you're moving through it. Men respond to that. So, male specific group therapy models, all right, can normalize help seeking among guys and create supportive communities that reduce isolation while also respecting men's legitimate concerns about vulnerability in unsupportive contexts. Okay, that's a mouthful, but I think that's really the direction that's going to yield the most benefit for men in therapy. And notice, that's all ethical, that's all sound. We're not sacrificing therapy principles or psychology principles to lure men in the door. We're not the predatory religious cult or the seeker church that sacrifices theology to get butts and seats. These models work. And other 12-step models have saved people's lives. Okay? And of course, there's stories where a group leader or group dynamic wasn't great. That's going to be in any group at all. Okay? So these approaches I talked about of supportive communities, help seeking through respecting men's vulnerability, experiences, all of that will help address the mental health statistics among men. We talked about that, honoring their lived experience. Okay, so let's talk more here. What do I want to get into? Yes. Yeah, the message. So the message of therapy needs to be more empirical and utilitarian. And those words, just the fact that those words are have a negative connotation says a lot. So we'll say this is four. We'll say that transdiagnostic brain-based approaches, which I'm going to talk about now, is our number four. Okay. So there's a growing recognition in the mental health field that single disorder therapies often fail to address the complex reality of psychological suffering. Okay. Research increasingly supports a shift toward transdiagnostic approaches that focus on underlying mechanisms rather than diagnostic categories. So, what I'm saying about that is we need approaches that go beyond saying, okay, this person has major depressive disorder, MDD, which is just what most people consider depression, and we're going to do a therapy just for that. No, this person has XYZ, whatever, blah, 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 blah. No, we're going to say, this is some core symptomology and we're going to approach it that way. Okay. So underlying mechanisms, I like that term. So the mechanisms of anxiety, for example, are stimulus, split second mental filtering, emotional response, repeat. Okay. So a kindling effect. You see something, you get scared once. Then when you see it again, you knew that you were scared before and you dread being scared. So you're scared of being scared. That's a mechanism of stimulus and response, okay, in behavioral psychology terms. So this approach of focusing on mechanisms, and those can be biological too, by the way. What I described was because there's neurochemicals and there's the electricity in the brain. That's the electrical component of the neuron. But we could go deeper into biological bases of things and temperament as well in a minute. But if we want, I don't know that that's going to be, I would say, useful for our conversation today, but maybe later. This aligns with the clinical reality that practitioners have always understood psychopathology at an individual level, recognizing that categorical diagnoses provide limited guidance for treatment selection. That's accurate. Transdiagnostic approaches acknowledge the considerable overlap in symptoms and mechanisms across different diagnostic categories, focusing instead on core processes that contribute to various forms of psychological distress. Okay, so when I created this whole talk today about 5 big shifts that need to happen in the mental health world, I thought the transdiagnostic shift was a really good one because I've been hearing about it for a long time now. What this means, the word trans originally, that prefix means across. So transdiagnostic means across diagnostic labels. It means beyond them. So transcendental means beyond our logically positivistic, realistic, naturalistic coil, right? Beyond that transcendental experience, right? It's beyond natural, right? Even though we use supernatural for natural, like transnatural would probably be that's like an alternate universe word we could have had. So, okay, if you think about this, like getting and dying on the hill and getting in the weeds of various arguments. One of those is like, well, is someone narcissistic or do they have borderline personality disorder? It's like, well, that doesn't really matter, Chief, because the process of being so focused on the self and having such emotional lability, meaning emotional volatility, is what matters for us to focus on as practitioners. Okay. So it doesn't matter as much where it matters where it came from for if what we're target selecting in EMDR therapy. But it doesn't matter that we die on the hill of placing the person in those categories. So for insurance purposes, we can say, okay, what fits best? Ethically, what do we find that's best? Okay, we're going to do it. But don't die on that hill and be so limited in your mind that you then lump that client into only those categories. That's short sighted. That's clinical mental myopia. Okay. So myopia being, I like this term. I like inventing new terms. So myopia is like short sightedness. If you're myopic, you have nearsightedness. Okay. Like I wear contacts, so that I've heard that term. So if you mentally have that, you can't see, you can only see what's really up front. You can't see beyond, right? Again, that word transdiagnostic into what someone actually needs as far as a whole person approach. And I don't mean that woo woo. I mean, someone can have what we call subclinical, meaning not just not exactly clinical level narcissism, and they could just be straight up borderline personality disorder diagnostic accuracy. And we ignore because they don't meet just enough of the narcissistic component, that whole clinical element. It's like, well, you've done a huge disservice to that person because you're not taking into account other stuff. So this transdiagnostic approach acknowledges the considerable overlap in symptoms and mechanisms. Okay. I already said that. So this perspective emphasizes individual case conceptualization while recognizing patterns in how psychological difficulties develop and are maintained. Okay. The movement toward transdiagnostic therapies represents a return to fundamental principles, okay, of psychological understanding while incorporating new insights from neuroscience, ding, 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 and clinical research. Now, here's the deal with that, folks. I can't, folks, I like that kind of, I'm saying it ironically. Here's the deal with that approach. So when you look at Freud and you look at the big bad wolf, when you look at good old Sigmund's psychotherapeutic legacy, and you see that he would look at defense mechanisms as they formed the personality and personhood, that's a far cry from what we do now. I mean, you give somebody a 2-year master's and you give them a diagnostic Bible that is not divinely inspired, and you say, okay, so you're a therapist now, Mazel Tov, and you now have the ability to pronounce someone with a mental illness that their insurance will keep on file forever. Good luck. For God's sake, that's what's happening. If you don't believe me, please don't take my word for it. So, and I got heat on TikTok for saying that therapists get 2-year degrees and then go practice because in some states in America, therapists need 3-year degrees. Okay, 2 to 3 years, 6 in one, half a dozen in the other, whatever you want to say. I'm a therapist. I understand this. And I don't fault, look, 3 years to understand the human mind in its entirety is laughable, for one. But for another, I mean, I don't think everyone needs a PhD. I don't have one because several reasons. The expensiveness, the fact that I needed to work and support myself, and getting a master's is kind of a more rapid way to do that. And the fact that I mean, I've written research and published it in an international clinical trauma journal, and a lot of PhD doctors haven't done that. And that's not me throwing my weight around saying I'm the big, bad, great author. What I'm saying is, if you are a master's level therapist like me, and you do recommended reading that's not required, and you go and develop competency in your field, you can stand out as much as someone on paper who has a doctorate. not on paper, the term doctor before your name stands out way more. I'm not even going to try to gaslight that. So if I were Dr. Fox, that'd be cool. And I may go back to PhD program if I like save up a lot of money, whatever. But what I'm saying is there's a lack of training and there's a lack of awareness of core psychotherapeutic wisdom that would allow people to understand that mental health issues are not always as cut as dry as one diagnosis. Okay. And when you put someone in that category, they might overlap with some, and it's better to understand the developmental history and the defense mechanisms they use, right? Do they rely more on denial? Do they rely more on splitting, like someone is all good or all bad, right? That's so the second one, splitting, is very associated with borderline personality disorder. Someone loves you one day, hates you the next. It's called splitting of the ego. It's where you split your conscious self, and part of you really likes a person, and the other part you get activated, it's like your angry child part. Think about the richness of that narrative compared to the little boxes people get put in. And it's because we needed ways to harvest insurance payment that someone sitting in an office could make a checklist of. Because that's what people forget. Insurance billing codes are not written for therapists, they're written for someone who has no psychological training to stamp that the client's insurance will pay for it. That's a black pill. That's a hard one to swallow. But that's the truth. Someone taught me that. I'm like, oh, well, that makes sense. And again, go check it for yourself. Don't just believe me. So the movement towards transdiagnostic therapies, I mentioned that, focus on common underlying mechanisms rather than diagnostic labels. In doing so, therapists can develop more flexible and personalized approaches, okay, that address the unique presentation of each individual. And that's not gobbledygook. You can do that in a way that's standardized by having a rooting in traumatology, like me, okay, or in understanding neurological science. So, brain based approaches that target neuroplasticity mechanisms represent an important frontier in transdiagnostic treatment. Okay. Interventions like functional neurology include tailored exercises targeting specific brain regions for neuro rehabilitation. These neuroplasticity focused interventions operate on the principle that targeted stimulation can strengthen adaptive neural pathways and weaken maladaptive ones regardless of specific diagnoses. So even traditional therapeutic approaches like CBT, cognitive behavior therapy, can be enhanced by explicit attention to the neuroplasticity principles through which they create change. This neuroplasticity lens offers a scientific framework for understanding how diverse therapeutic approaches, from meditation to exposure therapy, that's my favorite, to neurostimulation, create lasting psychological change through their effects on brain structure and function. Okay, I like this next part. Approaches like hyperbaric oxygen therapy improve oxygen delivery, okay, throughout the body and brain, potentially facilitating neural repair and decreasing inflammation. By conceptualizing therapeutic change in terms of neuroplasticity mechanisms, therapists can select interventions based on their ability to target relevant neural circuits rather than diagnostic categories. So that creates more precise and effective treatment approaches. So that's a mouthful, I know, of my script here that I wanted to bring into, but I think it matters. So there's a new therapy called transcranial magnetic stimulation that is very effective in addressing OCD and depressive disorders by stimulating parts of the brain implicated in those. So, like, for instance, the basal ganglia is implicated in major depressive disorder. So, or excuse me, in OCD. That's in OCD. So, and then in other parts of depression, the brain's active. So it's just magnetic waves, okay? And then the person receives a few treatments of that a week for a certain amount of time, and then that's the treatment. So love that. I have nothing bad to say about that. I am on the cutting edge of research with that because one of my friends in New York alerts me to the amazing achievements that TMS is now accruing. So it lasts a few weeks, like a month of going in several times a week to get the brain, because you're reforming neural pathways. So you want to hit it repeatedly for a short amount of time to really get that in there. But after that, I think you maybe do once a month or even less than that. But that is something that is within like the past at least 20 years. I think even the last 10 years has been leaps and bounds on it. So and it lasts for a long time. Like the it's supposed to be in perpetuity, the changes once you undergo it. So another thing is neurofeedback, where you have brain based biofeedback with some non invasive electrodes stuck to the head with paste with putty, and So I don't believe insurance pays a lot for neurofeedback, but it certainly TMS is now on certain plans. I think you have to fail some medications first for some plans, and then they say, okay, we'll pay for. Oh, that's amazing. Someone in the chat had TMS. Okay, did your insurance pay for it? Let me know if you don't mind, if that's not too invasive. Because now, to answer the question that you had, Claudia, I believe that insurance will pay for it depending on what you have. I've heard that Cigna pays for it. I think most commercial insurances will pay. So that's good news for people who have that. And eventually, yes, United. That's right. Yeah, I'm sure it's not cheap. But I mean, it sucks. It really does. That's where we are with where brain care. But I mean, if someone got that over therapy, I wouldn't be mad if they needed that. Yeah, you do have to have failed some meds. Yeah, I mean, see, that's not great. I'm glad we're having this conversation though. Let's move on to the final point here that I think is important. Because I'm going to wrap up, try to keep this under a certain amount of time. Okay, number 5, enhancing online literacy in therapeutic context. Okay, so this is one that thank you, Claudia. I love doing these too. It's a lot of fun. And the more people support and the more people I get on here who care about it, the better it's going to be for building a community of people who have access to information that's true psychotherapeutic content and not what we could call fluff or just some light coaching stuff, self-care, feel better, that doesn't have any grounding. So, okay. So for those keeping score, here the big 4 that we talked about of the shift needs to happen is science-based approaches like EMDR therapy. We'll talk about brain spotting. Maybe I'll hold that over for another one. Things with research behind it instead of mismatch approaches in therapy that don't have any grounding. Okay. Number 2 was evolutionary psychology as a helpful lens that even Christians can adopt because you can see that unrestricted, desire for anything that helps you alone, you could call sin nature, and that explains a lot of human behavior. Okay, third thing was approaches that benefit men in the therapy world, since men are half as likely to go to therapy, even though they have 3 times the risk for death by their own hand. I don't know if saying the S word will emphasize my video here or get hit, but I did say death, and that, so oh well. Fourth thing was very big. It was looking at a transdiagnostic approach involving therapies that account for people with more depth than a simple box. Okay. And number 5, that we'll talk about probably more in a future stream, is online literacy. Boy, it's a big one. Okay. So hold your horses. This is going to be one that might ruffle some feathers. So the increasing importance of online literacy in therapeutic contexts reflects broader societal shifts toward digital communication. Okay? Your digital life impacts your actual IRL in real life world. Okay? So therapeutic practitioners need understanding of digital communication. We need competencies in that to effectively navigate online therapeutic space and to understand the nuances of text-based communication, and to recognize how digital contexts may alter therapeutic dynamics. Okay, so here's the deal. You hear about Andrew Tate and you hear about men following him, and we know what Tate's done. I'm not going to mention all that he's done on the stream and have that hit the AI that transcribes this, because Substack does that. But what I will say is Tate found a way to speak to men in a way that they think is what they need to hear. So we as therapists have to step up our game, especially male therapists and men, and use digital means to put out their truth, to put truth out there for how men can meet the challenges in their life and live the life they want to live. So how do we do that if we don't know how people are using digital means to put out messages that we may or may not agree with? Correct? So here's the deal. We need to understand what's trending. We need to understand what impact TikTok has. A few years ago, I noticed the massive shift in teens believing that they had dissociative identity disorder. Okay. Spoiler, 99.9% of the people that thought they had it didn't. So the reason they did is because TikTok was saying, big creators were saying on there, oh, I have this personality and this one, and they're alters, not alters like you worship on, but alters like alter personalities. So I have DID, and that content was considered very interesting by the algorithm because people watched it, found it wild and controversial. So what happened? More of it was prioritized. Videos went viral. And through an entirely digital way, teens and young adults were taught that DID was just having different parts of self, when really we know that's just having alter egos and like your artistic self, your athlete self, nothing more than that. But new language was added digitally, caught on, and therapists had to play catch up. Had no idea where this was coming from. I did because I like to follow some of that. And here's the deal: digital literacy does not have to mean that you spend 3 hours a night scrolling TikTok as a therapist with a life. It doesn't mean that. You don't have, it means follow some different outlets or newsletters, or get on X and look at digital trends, follow some people that talk about it, and maybe I'll compile a list of things that therapists can follow to know that. But we just have to develop competencies in helping clients navigate online mental health information, the whole landscape therein, because it's increasingly crowded with not just evidence-based stuff, which brings us back around to the beginning of the conversation, but actually harmful misinformation about having dissociative identity disorder when you don't. So I know a lot of this is me lumping more work onto therapists, but we do have to, yeah, the AI, well, and that's a whole nother conversation. So AI has formed into a therapeutic tool. Okay, so it's a sad state of affairs that many people would rather, either pay ChatGPT the $20 a month for premium than they would pay a therapist. Oh, I can't blame them. I'm gonna steel man that argument, which is the opposite of straw man. Straw manning is like tearing someone's argument apart by misrepresenting it. Steel manning it is actually making it stronger than it is. So, and that's a tactic you can use to kind of really understand what somebody's thinking. Basically, okay, so ChatGPT is cheaper. Okay, it has access to all the information on the web. Okay, it has the ability to go through and create tons of treatment planning options and stuff that's based on what you put in. But here's what it doesn't have: accountability, because no one cares to impress a text document by making a change. It doesn't have context. And you can keep asking it to try to make it have context, but it actually is slower to do that than to talk to a therapist who understands the nature of trauma. Because ChatGPT is going to keep telling you, like, I'm not trained to do that. Well, and they'll have medical ones that don't tell you that and that do go into the details, but really there's not as much context now for that. And on top of it, there isn't the ability to enact those approaches. It'll give you some ideas and some thoughts on what direction to go, and do CBT type worksheets with you, and some things that therapy, just busy work. ChatGPT is great for therapy busy work, but in my opinion, that's not what the most powerful therapy is anyway. It's so ChatGPT is not going to tell you your blind spots. It's going to take what you tell it, and then it's going to assume that you told it everything that's accurate about yourself. So someone with narcissistic personality disorder, they get on ChatGPT, it's going to go along with what they say and give them knowledge based on that. Someone who has low self-esteem, ChatGPT will probably argue against that and tell them to feel better or whatever, but it's not going to help them stay on the path of developing competencies and say, what I'm hearing is all of this. What do you have? It's not going to push back and help you as a person to understand what you have to do and when that you're not asking it. Now, I'm sure if I played around with the most updated model and I told it to act like a therapist and not take what I'm saying for granted, that it could do that. But how many people are going to do that or know to, and how many want that? Ooh, you don't really want to ask for accountability. Some people do. I think some of you may. Everyone isn't going to want that though, and they're not going to be ready for that conversation in the same way a therapist can ease people into that and help them be ready. So that's another element of online literacy that we need as therapists, is to understand new technology, because I'm actually an AI dabbler, enthusiast, whatever, and I find it pretty interesting. And what I've seen is impressive for creating essays and ideas. And what I find ChatGPT, thank you for everyone for the positive feedback. What I consider ChatGPT good for is putting ideas together as an essay, as some bullet points. Like, I use it, I know what I want it to do, and so I use it as a research assistant. I don't mean this rude, but if you have a college student and you tell them, find me 5 really good articles on trauma healing and neuroplasticity, and you have them get that for you, and they put it together, do you consider that person a genius? I wouldn't. They found what was out there and they gave it to you. So that's what I have ChatGPT. And that's what most people probably do is they have it be a glorified Google that instead of having all the results separate, you collate it and compile it together. And voila, you have something that you can kind of riff on and talk about. Like a doctor has someone bring something to them, like a medicine. It gives us all a digital assistant for online literacy. So by the way, this loops back into if you're a therapist or if you want to get better at being digitally literate, have your GPT, have your AI. I don't even like that word because it's not general intelligence. It's an online large language model, which is basically a word prediction machine that thinks to tell you the most probabilistic thing to say based on what you ask it. That's not smart. That's a parrot. People don't know that thinking at all. Just to be clear, that's not what it's doing. And I know that because I've researched it. Now, here's the deal. What you can use it for, though, is looking for trends and asking, like, what are big things that are an issue now on TikTok that people are talking about? And it can, and the big new improvement for AI back in my day of like 2 years ago when I started with ChatGPT is it would not go online for you. It would not get on there and look at things. It would say, I can't access the internet. Now it does. So you can actually, and then I like Perplexity. I use Perplexity a lot because it has a deep research function and it lets you do it more than ChatGPT, and it will scrub the internet for academic and peer like Reddit articles, and it will scrub all kinds of different corners to bring you the answer to your question. So if you want to know what are damaging mental health trends now, then it will tell you. And actually, I think that's my next topic. I think we've talked it out here. Damaging mental health trends. I could do that now. And guess what? It will probably remind me of stuff I heard about before. So that's really what AI is good for. It's a mental amplifier. Like I used it to amplify my mind. If I did it, let's be honest, if I did it in a way that I would be parroting stuff. I had no idea what I was saying if I did it to just go give me answers on stuff and pretend I knew some other stuff. Like I'd probably learn through using it, but that's the problem with kids using it in school is they don't know what they're actually saying when they have it write an essay and they don't know the material, right? Yeah, Perplexity. So here's the deal. I got to run. This was a little a little primer, a little appetizer, an hors d'oeuvre of that, and quite a bit of some other things that are near and dear to me. So, all right, note to self, because this will come up in the transcript. Our next talk is going to be let's keep it steady and say 5 damaging mental health trends that are impacting society now. Signing off.